Hi, and welcome to Punished for Protecting. I'm your host, Francesca Amato Banfield, and I am the founder of the National Coalition for Family Court and CPS Reform. We like to call CPS Child Predator Services, but we don't do that. Today I have a very special guest. As a matter of fact, I was a chapter leader for the Tri-State Coalition, and this is the founder of the Tri-State Coalition, Victoria Gribbin. Vicki is a licensed social worker, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Vicki, so you can tell the audience what you do and how long you've been doing this.
Thank you very much, Fran. I just wanted to mention that I was the founder of the New York chapter, that the Tri-State Coalition was actually founded by New York and New Jersey and Connecticut. I don't want to take that away from them. But anyway, yes, I am a licensed social worker in the state of New York. My specialty is in the area of forensic social work, which applies laws and legal systems to social work issues and to family and child issues. I am an expert in ADA, which is Americans with Disability Act, accommodations and assessments for people with disabilities, and I'm a domestic violence advocate. And I'm a retired New York City police officer.
Well, we want to welcome you. I'm so grateful to have you here today and appreciate you being here. And I would like for you to talk to the audience today a little bit about judges and what you feel from your years of experience they are missing in these cases of domestic violence, especially to women and children.
Yes, that's very true. I have been involved in the state court system for 10 years now. I've had experience in the matrimonial court, family court, and integrated domestic violence courts for my own case and helping as an advocate other women with children involved in contested cases. And what is an epidemic happening in New York State. At first I thought it was just in my particular county and my court, because Nassau County is an affluent county, and you have a lot of money in this county, and when it comes to custody, it becomes an issue, and then men try to take custody, and I found that the judges rely mostly on what the attorneys say, which is a conflict of interest, because the judges are gatekeepers. They are the finders of fact, and they are designated by the state to protect the safety, the lives, and the healthy development of children. But they basically leave all the fact finding up to attorneys. And when you have a contested case, whether you're married or not, they base the facts, the risks, if there's any domestic violence, if the child has any special needs, on attorney assessments that are not evidence-based. As social workers, we are trained to make evidence-based assessments and evidence-based recommendations. Of course, you base it on the unique situation and on the needs of balancing all the parties and on your experience, but you have to base it on evidence. And the courts, when it comes to divorce and custody, they look at it as this is strictly a legal process. It's money only. Custody is 50-50 unless a child is at risk, and they don't allow any objective 21st century evidence-based practice into their decision-making. And when you have invisible, forensically based issues such as domestic violence, a child with emotional needs or learning disabilities, or let's say parents that have medical issues, you need you need orders that protect children by protecting the mothers, if they're the primary caretaker, economically, and in all the orders from domestic violence. And the judges do not view orders as something that needs to have that standard of evidence or proof attached to it. And when it comes to domestic violence, they do not even acknowledge it as a relevant case fact unless it's egregious, which is a New York State law from 1985, O'Brien versus O'Brien, that set a standard where only egregious acts are relevant, but that was for equitable distribution. They somehow made that the standard for all domestic violence, and unless a child is afraid or the person's life is at risk or they hired a hitman, that's what they consider egregious, domestic violence doesn't count. So they're basically letting people who are abusers, and the research proves that the majority of abuse is committed by men. The majority of domestic violence, especially coercive control type, where you use the legal system to maneuver custody, to maneuver orders, to intimidate the other party, to re-abuse them when they want to divorce you or they want extra money. They use coercive control to use the court system to re-victimize women. Children are being placed at risk. Their development is being impacted, and the judges are not recognizing this.
I agree with you 100%, and I don't know exactly how it is specifically in Long Island. I have court watched in a lot of states at this point, and I've seen this as a national problem. But I've seen a couple different factors, being someone who's been victimized by domestic violence and trying to keep my own child safe, being the reason I got so deeply involved in this. As you know, I see them ignoring any kind of evidence. They don't, I mean, and we are, you know, pro parents, obviously, that's our main goal. But when we see domestic violence, we see this over and over again. I think it's like less than 2% of women that report domestic violence are lying. So that's a very small percentage of women that are lying. Why are they treating 98% of them like they're lying? I know I was never lying. Matter of fact, his criminal history makes it very clear. And yet my child is constantly put at risk, as you know. And all the children that I advocate for, I've seen cigarette burns in the arm up to forensic sexual abuse to the body that is clear as day. I've actually presented to the district attorney's office myself over and over. We highlighted in the reports the yellow neon marker and point at it. And it's like you're talking to somebody that has no eyes or ears, heart or brain. Have you seen a lot of this in your years of experience?
I have seen a ton of this in almost every contested case where they will just ignore it. It's like the judges and attorneys have become almost immune and turned off to it. I have seen cases where children have seen the mother being physically assaulted by the father, and they said, no, that's not child exposure. I have seen children who were emotionally having behavioral problems and emotional issues from the stress in the home, and they were told, no, you have to live together and until this case is over, or the child does not need therapy, cannot get therapy unless the insurance covers it. They never put the child's needs first. And I think the reason for a lot of this is that 30 years ago, when the domestic violence laws came into being, don't forget, it was only 100 years ago that, women, we didn't have a right to vote. 50 years before that, we couldn't even own our own children. Then we had to get the right to not get beaten by men, our husbands. Now, when we go to court, unless if the man wants to, and I hate to be, you keep using the word men, because there are women too, but it's very few. The research proves it's like 1 or 2% women, and they do exist. But just predominantly speaking, what I have seen is that the men now take advantage, because unlike civil courts, unlike criminal courts, do not go by higher standards of proof and evidence. And 30 years when the domestic violence laws came out, the courts were inundated with emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and it became a he said, she said, where they said, well, we don't know who's telling the truth, and we cannot just kick someone out of their home. So this is before the advent of social science research. Now, courts are about 50 years behind, as a rule, in most things. So the research came out, let's say, right before the turn of the century, 17 years ago. They're not relying on it because they don't have to. And the judges at this point, if they believe that a child is at risk, of course they'd want to help them, but they turn a blind eye. They leave it to the attorneys. A lot of it goes on behind closed doors. Every person I've spoken to, including myself, everything that happened between the attorney and the judge was behind closed doors. And then when you get to trial, if you get to trial, the judge doesn't even know half of what goes on, and the attorneys have been managing the cases, And it winds up being a system, a business where they are all on the same team of a successful case closure is where it's 50-50 custody and just 50-50 division of assets and basic child support. And if a woman accuses a man of being abusive, or a man accuses a woman, then they get in experts, and it becomes a dueling of the experts, and they're court-appointed experts that have no training in forensic social work or in child development or in domestic violence. They don't recognize that abuse of process, of the legal process, of manipulating the court, of manipulating financial orders, of telling lies. That is a form of domestic violence. New York State is the only state that has an Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, and their definition is coercive control using psychological, emotional, physical, legal, any type of coercive controlling elements to get a person to do what you want and to control them. And New York State, yet the judges don't recognize it. They only recognize criminal domestic violence, and that has nothing to do with the child.
I can honestly say to you, in Ulster County, I clearly have court watch, and I've been there for close to a decade. They do not give a crap about any evidence whatsoever. It doesn't matter if they watched. I really believe if they saw somebody beat a child to death in front of them, they would still give them some sort of custody.
Yes.
And I have been witnessing mothers losing their children 100%, being supervised that don't need to be supervised, have clean backgrounds, immaculate backgrounds, no criminal history, and the perpetrators are with the children, full custody and full control.
This has become a national. I'm sorry. This has become a national epidemic, and what's happening is it is becoming a business. Years ago, we had the 10 years doctrine. Women automatically, received children, right? And we didn't have a domestic violence law, so wasn't an issue. And now that women are in the workforce, and now that they have a primary parent standard, there's even more need to have correct evidence-based scientific forensic evaluations, not by court-appointed experts, by objective research-based experts. And the judges they're not trained in this. They are legal experts. Attorneys are legal experts. None of them are trained. You need a multidisciplinary team, and they need to be evidence-based, and they're not. And if the judges would just allow that into the court, then it would make a tremendous difference. And if they would begin to recognize coercive control, but they're not required to, and they don't. Every court is entitled to its own policies, procedures, and standards. And they are a self-regulating profession. And the Saunders study, which came out several years ago, that was funded by the Department of Justice, so it was an objective study, found that judges and attorneys and court-appointed experts are the least qualified people in the court system when it comes to assessing domestic violence and child safety. And if a person is abusing you using the system by taking away custody, by not giving you court-ordered money, the child suffers.
And that's one of my next questions too. I wanted you to kind of go over the ACEs and the ADA rights, American with Disability Act. And actually Barry Goldstein, which we know very well, and I will be interviewing him on here. He was at my trial, and he tried to educate them, and they would hear nothing of it. They actually retaliated right after, which is something typical. But Barry tried to educate them, and it's exactly true. They're lawyers and judges. They are illegally crossing boundaries that are not therapists of any kind, and they're making assessments of something that it's like, it would be like a doctor trying to be a mechanic, or a mechanic trying to be a doctor and do surgery.
Exactly. Yeah, I love Barry. He is right on the money. He has written amazing books. He is such an expert, and I'm familiar with your case. I mean, what he said was absolutely right and accurate. And the reason, judges in most courts don't want to even go down that road, because cases are decided based on precedent and case law. And if they create new case law precedent, it disrupts everything. And they are afraid of having the system shut down the way it almost did 30 years ago, until they came up with this formula for success, as defined by them, of closing cases based only on legal requirements. There is a huge gap between science and law. when you're dealing with family law, you're dealing with families, you're dealing with child development, you're dealing with people in crisis, and social workers understand how to help people, and the orders that judges issue are a form of intervention that can stop the abuse, that can empower both parties. There's no reason why a divorce, the civil laws are courts of equity. There's no reason why every single divorce order, no matter what your circumstances, cannot leave each person, each adult with equal civil rights, equal freedom to live their life the way they choose. And if they are married, when the economic partnership ends, that it's equitable. But it's much easier to just say, okay, 50-50 than to hire an actuary. It is very difficult to make equitable distribution decisions. It is very difficult to prove coercive control, even though it exists. But if judges are trained, and if judges in each court have new policies and new standards, if they allow for them to match the case and they take the time, they would actually be making a huge difference, closing cases faster and better, and not issuing orders that basically foster domestic violence. And then when you mentioned the ACEs, ACEs are the adverse childhood experiences, and that was something that came, that was born of research many years ago, which is a whole nother subject. It was about how women that, people that were overweight gain back the weight, and what was it in their childhood that made them gain the weight, and it turned out that it was trauma and sexual abuse, and they wound up creating a point system for different types of traumatic stress and traumatic experiences, and for each one that a child had, they would get 1 ACE point. And they found that people with the higher ACE score, the higher chance of you becoming abused yourself or an abuser as an adult, higher rates of substance abuse, higher rates of suicide, of school failure, of going on welfare, of obesity. And the ACEs are impacted by domestic relations orders. Court orders can prevent or promote ACEs, and they are promoting them, but they don't even, again, go down that road. What we need is a marriage between science and law. And we need someone else in there, because the attorneys either align or they're adversarial, and that system does not work when you're dealing with child development and coercive control. I wanted to say one thing about coercive control, that there are risks and consequences for a child not being protected from the mother being targeted by the legal, what we call legal abuse. They say there's no such thing, but there is. Dr. Karen Huffer coined that term. Abuse of the legal process is basically legal abuse. And when a judge, it's the judge's job to deny a contested motion, deny or grant someone's request and not listen to the opposition, but they just let the attorneys control these cases, because the attorneys wind up closing them, and then the judges, they don't believe that the children are being harmed. They really don't believe it. And there are so many flaws in the system, whether it's bias, whether it's intentional or unintentional, whether it's human error. Well, you have good attorneys, you have unethical attorneys, you have great judges, you have, terrible judges, unethical judges. I guess I'm sure there must be some. I haven't met them yet, but
not any of them. We wouldn't be in this situation if they were out there. But anyway,
in my own case, I spent $200,000. I spent $200,000 on 3 attorneys. Not one filed a motion. Now I'm pro se filing my own motions. They're not responding to any, because they would have to grant me what I need. And I'm actually appealing my case right now.
Okay, don't worry about the dog.
Okay, but when it comes to a solution for this, okay, there are so many things that can go wrong. I like to use the ADA, Americans with Disability Act, as a model for what the solution can be to a lot of these problems, because the ADA is a civil rights law, comes from the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and you have several titles. Title I applies to employment. Title II applies to public entities. It applies to schools, businesses. Title III are attorneys. But if a person has disabilities, a qualified ADA disability, and you just have to look on ada.gov to see if you're qualified. They are a protected class member, and they are entitled to certain civil rights protections. All right, and they are tied to federal laws under 28 CFR 35.130. And those are non-discrimination laws for people with disabilities. When you get a court order or you have a court proceeding, Constitution applies, okay, and so does the ADA. And when you have contested cases and one person has a disability and they're saying, I need the money for therapy, or I need the money for an attorney, or I need the money, for medicine, and the man says, well, no, this is not necessary, and let's have a hearing, or I don't have it. The judge has to apply the ADA, and they don't. And they are violating federal rights. They are causing disabilities from traumatic stress. This is like a whole show in itself. They're causing disabilities with traumatic stress. But if they would apply the ADA, every single order is a service. A Title II service is a court proceeding. It's an order. It cannot violate the ADA. And if they would just comply with that, they would say, well, our definition of domestic violence is egregious. No. Whatever is going on in the home between the mother and the father that's impacting the child, economic abuse, that's the definition that applies to this case. That's the definition that can, that is the risk factor that poses a direct threat to the child, to their health and safety if the mother isn't protected, or if the child doesn't receive the money they require, and that is the standard they should use. The courts use their own policies, practices, and standards. They have discretion. They do things behind closed doors with attorneys. And it's violating the ADA. And if people would just start to come together like this and to let the powers that be know, the federal government, then maybe we can make a difference and change it, because they're violating federal laws. And there is no separation. There is a separation between federal and state when it comes to ACEs, orders by state courts that are creating ACEs and that are creating disabilities and promoting domestic violence. That is a federal issue. That's a public policy issue. That's no longer a state issue. The state court is the problem. And it comes from not recognizing domestic violence and not stopping it, and not putting children first based on research.
Well, I mean, like I said, I have seen where there's been clear-cut evidence of drugs right in front of the children, and Child Protective Services called in and do absolutely nothing, not indicate the parent. Judges knowing all about it, videos, medical records, repeated arrests, repeated police records, repeated phone calls from, screaming mothers, and, children admitting that they're being sexually touched to a mandated reporter, and everybody ignoring it, every single last person ignoring it. So,
they're not trained. And there's a lot of gender bias.
How could you be trained? How could you, like, one of the things that I have to say about Barry Goldstein, and he capped his time that time when he did my trial, he capped it off with, after he gave all the scientific research and so on and so forth, he capped it off with, and this is common sense. It is common sense.
It is common sense.
We all looked at each other. Nobody in that court knew what the gold standard was. When he mentioned the gold standard, they were all asking each other. I had to explain to them. There I am having to explain to the judge and to the attorneys in the room what the gold standard was. They didn't know what that was. The one opposing attorney did not know the difference between that we have a Supreme Court in every state, in every county, in every state, and then he didn't know that we had a Supreme Court. I mean, these are the people that I'm dealing with, and it's just like mind-blowing. And when I court watch, I sit there and I go, sometimes I really wonder if they're even human beings. Did you go through school and get these degrees to become an attorney and then a judge and not know? Or a lot of them don't have kids, but if they have children of their own or grandchildren, aren't they saying, I wouldn't want my kids involved with any of this stuff? And don't you need proof? You press a button today and you could see an entire criminal history pulled right up on their screen, right up on their computer. They can see the repeated orders of protection. They can see the repeated arrests, and they can see everything. So it's not just that a person is, I can understand if you're making something up and you're bullcrapping. That's
right.
one.
Right.
But if it's not like, okay, I'm here today, but he's in jail again. Hello, does that not tell you something? These are my concerns. Now, if a child, and this is something I wanted to ask you, if a child is not being physically punched in a home that they're seeing aggressive behavior, or maybe they're seeing their mother be hit, and of course, and we're not just pro-mother, okay, we are pro-family.
Oh, yeah.
I advocate for a lot of very good fathers, and I would, wholeheartedly.
And I know two fathers who were the victims. I believe, yes.
That are victims. So please understand that. But we're giving stats here. But I just want to know, what happens to children? Are they perfectly fine if they're in a home with drugs and alcohol and a domestic violence? So it's okay because the child's not, quote unquote, afraid, like you said?
No, it depends on what standard you use. The courts use a legal standard of I don't know what, but I know that if you use a child's development standard, okay, each child goes through, depending on their age, goes through different phases of development. And depending on what they are exposed to, a toxic environment, emotionally, psychologically, socially, nurturing-wise, it depends on what stage of development they're at, and it depends on their unique neurocycle profile. You need a thorough, comprehensive, evidence-based assessment by using that approach, a holistic approach, a child development approach. And, there's case law by the Supreme Court of the United States, the Roberts Court, that I came across. And it was over videos and children being not having the, they say children's brains don't fully develop until they're 25. And it was how do these videos cause damage to the children if they're being exposed to them, and is a child capable of making that judgment call? And then that court, Roberts Court, there were 3 cases, and what they determined in all 3 were that children's brains are not fully developed, that they do need the adult guidance, and that they do need a scientific approach to determining whether or not they're being harmed, because there are many variables. And like I said, a lot of it's common sense, but a lot of it depends on the child and the situation. And they put down case law precedent that technically all civil courts should be following, but none of them do. That says all orders that impact childhood development should be based on scientific research. So, right, and the judges don't.
I have another question for you. In regards to, because I've seen this over and over again, I've literally seen it where I know I've seen the evidence, and I mean evidence. I'm not talking about somebody just said something. I've seen actual evidence. Well, you know this. And I've spoke to children where they've actually admitted to sex abuse, where they feel safe, or they admitted to being hit by a father or a mother, or where they feel safe. When they feel safe, then they're taken privately by an investigator, and they don't tell them that it happened, or they deny it. And the investigator closes the case because the child didn't admit to it. What are your thoughts on that? Because I can tell you mine.
My thoughts again are, I feel like we're living in the dark ages, and why are the courts still operating under 20th century standards when we have all of this research and all this technology, and it just doesn't make sense. I do know that CPS, because I know from the case upstate with Mason DeCosmo, and I know from my own experience with CPS, that CPS caseworkers need a bachelor's degree, but it could be in anything. It could be in government. It could be in environment, and then they get trained by CPS. And they also lack the right qualifications. They can do screening, but you need domestic violence experts that are advocates, and you need child development experts and a multidisciplinary team. And I know even CPS, when they came to in my case, they came and they actually made a recommendation. And I said, finally, thank God the abuse at home will stop, and he'll be ordered to move. We had 2 homes and an empty apartment. And they said, no, that's just CPS's opinion. I said, but doesn't it count? So there's just so much manipulation, so many unqualified people put in positions of power. And that's the problem. And it's all driven by money.
It's all driven by money. And people seem to think that if you have a lot of money, that's how you're going to win. That is not necessarily true. Mm-hmm. They're actually using impoverished people, because what they're doing is they're robbing your tax dollars, and then they're paying for public defenders, which we call public pretenders. And they're so that you can keep going back and back and back, because you have a child for 18 years that you're supposed to be, caring for that child, and they've got you for 18 years. You walk in, you're not walking out for 18 years, maybe longer, on college or special needs children. So they're using impoverished people to abuse you further. That's what they're doing. It's an abusive system. I think it should be completely abolished. That's my opinion. I think it's a very good opinion. I think it should be abolished completely. I think people should be left alone. And I think that law enforcement should be educated better on domestic violence, because you can't walk into a home and say everything looks good, because some of the most charismatic, well-polished, perfect-looking people are the biggest abusers.
Absolutely.
And you know, and then just walk into a home and say everything looks good because they got I can't tell you how many times they'll say, oh, hi, we're Child Protective Services, and when is it good for you to come, for us to come see you? That's not how it's supposed to be done.
Absolutely.
So, you know, the wake-up call, and they'll spray the house and make it smell clean and put the drugs away, and, you know, that kind of thing. There's that aspect, and then there's this that aggravates me to no end. You've got, supposedly, because obviously it's all one big wash, but you've got Child Protective Services that if a woman is being beat and she doesn't get out of the home with the children or throw him out, she loses her kids. So she gets the abuse on top of the abuse. Imagine taking some woman's children that she gave birth to and carried for 9 months. How sick is that? Because she's being abused. But if she goes to family court and she doesn't work with him, she's being abused by the judge now, because now he's going to take her children and give them to him.
Yeah.
So what is that? Explain out.
It's like spin the wheel. It's the wheel of fortune. Okay. Will you get a good judge? Will you get a good attorney? Will you get a court system? What will you get a good CPS caseworker? Will you get a good evaluator? And that is not what that's why society is, in my opinion, slowly falling apart. If you look at the statistics by the CDC, by the National Institute of Mental Health, disabilities are on the rise, ACEs are on the rise, suicide is on the rise, female poverty is on the rise, and it all comes down, and the divorce rate is higher, the rate of single, mothers that were never married are higher, and why is it that domestic violence, which is, again, economic abuse, psychological, emotional, using the court system, why is it still around after 100 years or 200 years of trying to eradicate it? Because it's invisible, because it's an area of expertise, and this is the only courts in the land able to prevent it with orders that give a woman independent economic independence and access and sole legal custody or sole physical custody, or the man if he's being victimized, and to determine what type of abuse it is. There are 5 different types of domestic violence. Each type has its own level of risk, and for it to not even be included in what's relevant to deciding these orders, it's the family court and the matrimonial court orders in this country that are fostering all of this and promoting it.
Well, and I'm dealing specifically, and I'm not the only one. A lot of the survivors of the same court have the same child attorney, and she's a nightmare, and she's just so out there. And she'll say things like, well, he wants to do such and such. And I remember even turning around and saying to her, well, that's why God gave children parents, because they're not capable of making decisions. They don't know not to run across the street when a truck is coming. That's why you have a mother to grab your hand and tell you when to go and when it's safe. Mm-hmm. But if a child said to you that can't swim, I'm just going to jump into 10 feet of water, but because I have an attorney now, my attorney said I can. The hell with what my mother said. So you just say, it's okay, no life raft, just in you go, do whatever you want now because you have a child attorney. That is another thing that I find to be such an invasion of human and parental rights, to have a stranger tell you how to function, how to not protect your children, how to not raise them because the child told you. A child that hasn't, like you just got done saying, how old? 25? I mean, before they're fully developed yet. Mm-hmm. There's a reason God gave parents to 18 and under, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden we have a whole new thing now, which since I think 2009, children now have attorneys. I don't even understand it for the life of me. I can't even wrap my head around the ignorance behind that. It's just so ignorant, I can't even argue with it.
Yeah, ignorant. If you look back to the whole beginnings of how the family courts even, were born when divorce became a new rose and started to increase. Domestic violence does not belong in the court. A legal divorce can belong in the court, but that piece is missing. Well, the best expert on a child are the parents and the person the primary caretaker who is raising that child. And then to identify the child's risks requires experts, and most people don't have that kind of money. The state would be better off putting its money into evidence-based assessments by impartial research-based places like Harvard, or, start out with the ones that are gold standard, all right, the Ivy Leagues, or, universities. And then from there, go on to other people who can be trusted, not manipulated by the courts, okay? Very often the so-called experts are only qualified because they took a course or two, and they get paid $15,000, $10,000, and it's a supposedly a system where they just get picked at random off a list. When was the last time they updated that list or checked the qualifications on that list?
Absolutely. And New York City just had a major exposure of all these supposed experts, and every single last one of them were caught lying. So they can continue the rotating cycle in the family courts in New York City. So they've all been exposed. It's just a matter of time before the rest of them, believe me when I tell you, because I've been doing this for a decade, and I don't play. I mean, you know my story, and I have a lot of ducks in a row that haven't come out yet. Those little ducks are just about to come forward, because they're all going to, I'll leave it at that. But just know that, we've done a lot of groundwork. We've been abused a lot by the court here. A lot of us abused, but there's a lot of people that are in that court that they have no idea are advocates.
Yes.
So they're sitting there taking notes, and a lot of them are rotating judge. A lot of them now, what they're doing is and I'm one of them, rotating lawyers in the court, public defenders, lawyers. And what that does is now those lawyers will be subpoenaed to court to testify against what they've seen in there. And these are different methods, and I'm just giving a little key point here. That's just one of my many things in my arsenal that you can do. And because believe me, eventually this system will implode on itself. There's just so much they could do, and the Army is rising, and the Army has had enough, because you're messing with children.
Yes. And it's so, well, it's several things. It's social media, okay? The world in 2017, 16, 15 is not what it was even in the year 2000. And now all of us are connecting and uniting. You have research, and then you have women that are educated and who are not afraid to speak out. And when you have 10 years of experience the way you have, and you take that trauma and that victimization, and you turned it into, well, what can I do to save and protect my child and to prevent this from ever happening again, like you're doing, which is how I came to be in this. I thought I was going to be a forensic I thought I was going to be a special education social worker, and now I'm a forensic social worker trying to get the court ADA into the courts, and this will happen. And Ulster is one of the worst I've seen. Every court has horror stories, but what I've seen up there, it's like 9 out of 10 are.
The barn. I have to have you wrap it up because we're at the end of our wrap here, but I just want to ask you one more very important question, if you can kind of answer that in 30 seconds. What are your thoughts of these judges trying to put fake mental illnesses on mothers that report abuse? That's a biggie right there, but if you can get that in 30 seconds.
Oh my God, okay. Okay, that is, mother's mental illness is the du jour of de jure diagnosis to close cases that are contested. And that is an ADA violation. You do not have to have a disability. And if they accuse you of having one, okay, then you can sue them, and they are no longer protected under judicial immunity under the ADA. And most judges do not know that. I would like one show just on that, please.
You said it in 10 seconds, and I'm very proud of you. So I'm going to have to wrap this up. Unfortunately,
proud of you. What you're doing is amazing.
Well, we're very close to out of time. Vicki, I can't thank you enough. We're going to get you back on here again. And I just want to thank our viewing audience. You can reach us at www.punished4beingaparent.com. We want your story, so we would like to interview you if you are good, clean parent with no criminal history, that you're trying to protect your children or child, and the courts are forbidding you. If they're supervising you, but they're not supervising the criminal parent, these are the types of stories that we want. Email me, please, and we will get to you as soon as we can. We are being inundated with people that want to be interviewed, so I'm going through and trying to get everybody fit in. But matter of fact, we're doing this recording at like 9:30 at night. But get in there, www.punish4b.com. We look forward to your story, and thank you again, and thank you, Vicki Gribbin.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Are we done?